Hello, Planeswalkers! Andrew here, bringing you another deck tech. Today, we're going over a Niv-Mizzet Reborn deck. I've gone back to a fully scripted format after my last Voldic deck tech, and contrary to both of my previous deck techs, we're looking at what I view as a higher tier version of this deck, rather than the one I own in paper. This deck list has no particular budget, but my personal deck list that I own in paper that is cheaper than this list will also be linked down in the description below. Now let's jump into the deck that I call Duel of Fates. Firstly, let's go over our commander, Niv-Mizzet Reborn. He's a 6/6 legendary creature dragon avatar that costs 1 Wooburg and has flying. When he enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 10 cards of your library, and for each color pair, you choose a card that's exactly those colors from among them and put them into your hand. Put the remaining cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. For this strategy, we're running a collection of dual-colored card good stuff, with the intent of ramping and repeating Nivi's ETB over and over again, and casting huge threats from our deck. Let's take a look at our methods of ramping in this deck. We have Mana Rocks in Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Firemind Vessel, and Chromatic Lantern. Arcane Signet taps for any color in your commander's color identity. Soul Ring is the classic. You know it, you love it. Firemind Vessel enters tapped, and can be tapped for 2 mana of different colors, and it's also thematic to Nivi. Chromatic Lantern taps for any 1 color, and also gives all of your lands the ability to tap for 1 mana of any color. Next up are our Mana Dorks, and we'll start off with a newer Mana Dork that I guess really isn't much of a Mana Dork, because he doesn't generate mana, but he does help with mana fixing in a similar fashion to Chromatic Lantern. This is Dryad of the Elysian Grove. He's a 2/4 nymph that lets you play an additional land on each of your turns, and makes all of your lands every basic land type in addition to their other types, meaning they can tap for any color of mana. Next is Feybarrow Elder, Coiling Oracle, and Leyline Prowler. Okay, so half of these creatures are not mana dorks, but they do help with mana ramp. Feybarrow Elder is a 0/0 Treefolk Druid. It gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control, and taps for 1 mana of each color among permanents you control. Coiling Oracle is a 1/1 Snake Elf Druid, and when he enters, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, you put it onto the battlefield, otherwise it goes into your hand. Leyline Prowler is a 2/3 Nightmare Beast with Death Touch and Lifelink that taps for any color. Next are general mana ramp spells: Circuitous Route, Cultivate, Urza's Filter, Growth Spiral, Mirari's Wake, and Urban Evolution. You'll find that we generally try to stick to dual-colored cards, but some of the best ramp spells are monocolored, like the first 3 of these. Circuitous Route is a sorcery that lets you put 2 land and/or gate cards from your library onto the battlefield tapped. Cultivate is a sorcery that lets you search your library for up to 2 basics and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Urza's Filter is an artifact that makes it multicolored spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. Growth Spiral is an instant that lets you draw a card and then put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Mirari's Wake is an enchantment that gives all of your creatures +1/+1 and says whenever you tap a land for mana, you add 1 mana to your pool of any type that land produced. Urban Evolution is a sorcery that lets you draw 3 and then play an additional land this turn. Next up is our set of dual-colored good stuffs. We've got Atarka, World Render, Athreos, Shroud Veiled, Baleful Strix, and Clothis, God of Destiny. Atarka is a 6/4 dragon with flying and trample that boosts your dragons with double strike, useful for dealing extra commander damage with Niv-Mizzet Reborn. Athreos is a 4/7 enchantment god with indestructible and devotion to black and white, and at each of your end steps you put a coin counter on another creature that brings that creature back to the battlefield under your control, should they ever die or be exiled. Baleful Strix is a 1/1 bird with flying and death touch, and when it enters, you draw a card. Clothis is a 4/5 enchantment god with indestructible and devotion to red and green, and she lets you exile a card from any graveyard on your pre-combat main phase, generating mana or gaining you life and hitting everyone else depending on what you exile. Knight of New Alara, Niv-Mizzet Parun, and Tatiova, Benthic Druid are up next. Knight of New Alara is a 2/2 human knight that gives every other multicolor creature you control +1/+1 for each of its colors. Nivi III is a 5/5 dragon wizard with flying, and he cannot be countered. Whenever you draw a card, he hits something, and whenever anyone plays an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. Tatiova is a 3/3 merfolk druid that gains you a life and draws you a card whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. Now we look at some of the ways of repeating Nibi's ETB. The creatures we have that do this is Dax Duplicate, Evil Twin, Mistmeadow Witch, Progenitor Mimic, Soul Herder, and Thassa, Deep Dwelling. Thassa, Soul Herder, and Mistmeadow Witch can all blink Nivi, while Evil Twin, Dax Duplicate, and Progenitor Mimic can all copy Niv. Our non-creatures in this category are Panharmonicon and Oath of Teferi. Panharmonicon is an artifact that doubles all of our ETBs, and Oath of Teferi is a legendary enchantment that blinks another permanent we control when it enters, with the added bonus of letting us activate the loyalty abilities of our planeswalkers twice each turn. Our fourth strategy is something I like to call disrespectful maneuvers. This includes our counter magic like Ionize, Dovid's Veto, and Counterflux. We also have cards that help all of our creatures, like Boros Charm and Rhythm of the Wild. Boros Charm is an instant that lets us choose between hitting a player for 4, making all of our permanents indestructible for the turn, or giving a target creature double strike until the end of the turn. Rhythm of the Wild is an enchantment that gives all of our creatures Riot, letting them choose between a +1/+1 counter or haste when they enter the battlefield. Our two sort of extraneous cards in this category are Deathrite Shaman and Smothering Tithe. Smothering Tithe is another classic, being an enchantment that lets you make a treasure whenever an opponent draws a card, unless they pay 2 mana, and those treasures can really help in a 5-color deck like ours. Deathrite Shaman is a 1/2 Elf Shaman that either taps to exile a land from a graveyard, adding 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, or taps to exile an instant or sorcery from a grave and hit each opponent for 2, or even exile a creature from a grave and heal you for 2. Now we move on to removal, which I tailored to be thematic for our collection of planeswalkers, purely for funsies. That said, I'll make sure that the better removal spells to run pop up when I mention the worst ones. Our themed removal spells are Anguished Unmaking, Despark, Explosion/Expansion, Imprisoned in the Moon, Nightmarish End, Time Wipe, and Venser's Diffusion. Unmaking and Despark exile something, Explosion deals X damage to something, with a tacked-on expansion letting us copy an instant or sorcery with CMC 4 or less, and Imprison in the Moon is an enchantment aura that turns a creature, land, or planeswalker into a literal rock. Nightmarish End is an instant that gives target creature -X/-X for the turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. This can kill indestructible creatures, by the way. Time Wipe is a board wipe that lets you return target creature you control to its owner's hand before it goes off, and Venser's Diffusion returns target non-land permanent or suspended card to its owner's hand. Useful for snatching back stolen cards. Also, here are those better removal spells. Assess the Trophy destroys a permanent an opponent controls, and then they get a basic land. Desperate kills the target creature, and then you get a basic land. Kyle's Guile lets you choose 2 from forcing each opponent to sacrifice a creature, exiling each opponent's graveyard, creating a 1/1 flyer, gaining 4 life, or if you pay an extra 3, you get to do all 4. Utter End exiles an online permanent. Bedevil, Merciless Eviction, and Supreme Verdict are our themeless removal spells. Bedevil is an instant that simply destroys target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. The other 2 are sorceries, where Merciless Eviction lets you exile either all artifacts, all creatures, all enchantments, or all planeswalkers. Exiling all planeswalkers is useful for shooting yourself in the foot if you have all of your planeswalkers out and you're frustrated and you simply want to be a salty prick. Lastly, Supreme Verdict can't be countered and simply destroys all creatures. Next up we have Johnny Manchild and the Poor Bastards, which is made up of Nicol Bolas, Dragon God, Ashiok Nightmare Muse, Ral Storm Conduit, Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord, Tamio Collector of Tales, Teferi Time Raveler, and Venser the Sojourner. This band of walkers collectively hold a number of uses, from blinking Nivi, copying your instants and sorceries, stopping your opponents from casting spells on any turn other than their own, and even copying other planeswalkers' abilities. This deck is a good dozen or so planeswalkers away from being a Super Friends deck, but that would both be a completely different deck build, and it would have prevented me from accurately making the Johnny Manchild joke, as we'd have more than 7 planeswalkers. The band's support group is our next category. Creatures in this category are Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, and Notion Thief. Golos is a 3/5 artifact scout that searches you any land when he enters, and you can pay 2 and a Wooburg into him to exile the top 3 cards of your library and then play them for free. Notion Thief is a 3/1 human rogue with flash that lets you steal your opponent's draws, except for their draws on their draw steps. Our artifacts and 1 enchantment here are the Chain Veil, Oath of Nissa, and Tome of the Guild Pact. The Chain Veil lets us pay and tap it to activate any of our Planeswalker abilities an extra time this turn, with the downside of hurting us at the end of the turn if we don't use a Planeswalker ability. When Oath of Nissa enters, you take a creature, land, or Planeswalker out of the top 3 cards of your deck and add them to your hand. It also lets you spend any kind of mana to cast Planeswalker spells. Tome of the Guild Pact has you draw a card whenever you cast a multicolored spell, and it taps for 1 mana of any color. The sorceries of this category are Bring to Light, Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, Reap the Past, and Reborn Hope. Bring to Light has Converge, letting you search your library for a creature, instant, or sorcery with CMC less than or equal to the number of colors used to cast Bring to Light, exile it, and then cast it for free. Primeval's Glorious Rebirth can only be cast if you control a legendary creature or planeswalker, and returns all legendary permanents from your grave to the battlefield. Reap the Past, as you return X cards at random from your grave to your hand before exiling itself. Last is Reborn Hope, which returns any multicolored card from your graveyard to your hand. Finally, we have our land base, the most edit-intensive part of this whole video. Yay! We have Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Field of the Dead, Gateway Plaza, Maze's End, Mana Confluence, and Reliquary Tower. We also run all 10 Guild Gates and all 10 of the Shocklands. We also run 2 forests, 3 islands, 2 plains, and 2 swamps. Once again, this is one of the best builds of this deck in my opinion, and my personal in-paper deck list will be in the description. It's one of my favorite decks to play, where I just overwhelm my opponents with dual-colored creatures and planeswalkers. It's among my most aggressive decks with how quickly I can gain card advantage. With that said, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment down below. Let us know what you think of this deck, and what changes you would make to it. If you want to see more from us in the future, please consider subscribing. Have a great day, y'all.